And then I want to come back to this. You said that when the gun went off, you experienced no kick.
Yeah, there was no recoil.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to deal with some of the latest news updates in the Rust / Alec Baldwin incident, and then we're also going to look at Alec Baldwin's claim of no recoil in the police interview and why that doesn't make sense. And we're really going to go into the science in terms of true crime rocket science, in terms of that particular assertion. Now, in terms of more recent news, a Rust producer said at the Cannes Film Festival, quote, "We are confident we'll be able to complete the movie." Now, while much of the true crime community is somewhere else, another high-profile celebrity case has gotten something of a reprieve. One moment we were all studying Alec Baldwin's police statement, the body cam from the Rust set, and even the armorer's double statements. Next, poof, onto something else. Meanwhile, as the dust was still settling, articles like this came out. Producers of Alec Baldwin's Rust claim they followed all safety protocols on the tragic film set. That was despite the report from April 21st, that's about a month ago now, saying industry protocols weren't followed. And so after reasserting that Helena was shot because all safety protocols were followed, not because they weren't, the next step was to suggest they might actually finish the movie, which is something Baldwin has privately wanted to do all along. This article from March 2022, Alec Baldwin wanted to finish Rust after fatal shooting. Well, that's clearly been in the offing for some time. So it's not surprising that people and other publications are reporting on the intent to complete the film even before the investigation is complete, and despite or in spite of a bunch of lawsuits that remain in the offing. What's the reality? What's the bottom line between all these conflicting headlines and PR? Well, just this. No one wants to take responsibility for the deadly mistakes in the Rust shooting. And as you can imagine, while the carrot of the production possibly going ahead, that possibility, while that is dangled in front of the crew, you can imagine no one associated or affiliated with this film is going to want to break rank. Does that make sense? Now, before we get to the recoil aspect, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So just before the 20-minute mark in the police interview, I'll put a link to that in the description. The detective refers to her notes and queries something that she's written down. I'll play it for you again, but she says, and then I want to come back to this. You said that when the gun went off, you experienced no kick. Baldwin responds, yeah, there was no recoil. There was no recoil that I remember. I mean, literally, I'm holding the gun and slowly pull, cock, bang. As soon as I cocked, bang, and I jumped. Obviously, that's the last thing.
And then I want to come back to this. You said that when the gun went off, you experienced no kick.
Yeah, there was no recoil. There was no recoil that I remember.
Okay.
I mean, literally, I'm holding the gun, and literally slowly pull, turn, cock, bang. And as soon as I cock it, bang! And I jump. I mean, you obviously, that's the last thing you think is going to happen.
Now, some might say the first thing you'd think is it is a live round, given that's what you've just felt, heard, and what you're seeing in front of you. Scientifically, Baldwin's statement doesn't make any sense. He says he didn't feel a recoil, but then tailors that slightly to say he doesn't remember. So there may have been a recoil, he just doesn't remember it. I'd wager if it was a real bullet in a .45 caliber revolver, he would have felt it and he would also have remembered it. It would have come as a shock. Now, you can go on YouTube and you can look at what a real round looks, feels, and sounds like. You can have a look at the recoil when the gun is fired off on camera. But think about if the discharge is unexpected and thus uncontrolled. You can imagine the recoil and sound to come as something of a shock. Now, it's possible he was in shock, and one can make several arguments about perception and emotion. But instead of going that route, I want to remind you of
Newton's third law.
Newton's third law is every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, without getting too sciencey, we don't need to know too much about the discharge or the type of bullet or the type of gun, as long as we know the projectile passed straight through Helena's body, in through the front, out through the back, before passing into Joel Souza, passing into his shoulder and lodging against his shoulder blade. Souza described the impact of this bullet projectile as feeling like he'd been kicked in the shoulder. And that's after the round had passed through someone else. So are you really telling me the force of that round in reverse? Now turn on your imaginations. Imagine the round going in reverse, that kick into Souza's shoulder being reversed. He sort of rebounds, the bullet comes out of his shoulder. It is going now through a concordion of tissues to emerge and then enter the barrel, taking a bright explosive flare with it. Now, if you imagine the shock wave, you imagine all of that force in reverse. Are you saying you're not going to feel any force? There's definitely going to be a powerful recoil because of the forward force of the projectile, which we know was extremely powerful. Thus, the reverse thrust wouldn't have been insignificant. Does that make sense? Also, since Baldwin was firing from a .45 caliber Pieta long Colt revolver, the relatively longer barrel would also tend to dampen recoil, but I'm not sure one could say it would have dampened so much that you couldn't tell the difference between a flash round and a live round. So, as I say, a kind way to explain Baldwin's confusion here is that his emotions or bad memory got the better of him, and he simply couldn't remember accurately what had actually happened. Now, if we go to the very beginning of the interview, within the first minute, Baldwin is asked unambiguously who gave him the firearm. Now, in this instance, there is no emergency, no loud bang, no trauma, no drama that might interfere with his senses, with his emotions, or with his memory. You also can't argue that weeks or months or any significant amount of time has gone by to cloud or interfere with his memory. As the detective enters the cubicle, the officer and Baldwin are talking about Halls and Hannah. Let's listen in.
So sometimes you would hand the gun to Halls, but you never, he never handed the gun to you.
No.
Okay.
No, never.
But you would specifically, right before this incident, Hannah handed you the gun and said, cold. It wasn't David.
I don't be cold. No, Hannah handed me the gun.
Okay. It wasn't anybody else but Hannah.
No, Hannah handed me the gun.
And she specifically said that it was a Colt.
I believe she said cold. I don't be cold exactly.
We know that 2 months later, Baldwin said, or rather went along with the interviewer, suggesting that Halls handed him the gun.
I'm handed a gun, and someone declares, they said, this is a cold gun.
Dave Halls.
The first AD.
So if this ever sees the inside of a courtroom, Baldwin will likely be asked to answer this question clearly and unambiguously. I think there are three possibilities. Hannah gave him the gun, Halls gave him the gun, or Baldwin took the gun from the cart outside the church. Of the three, I'm the least convinced that Hannah gave him the gun. I'm not going to take it further than that, but coming back to the assertion, certainly the one in the Hollywood Reporter, that they are confident they'll be able to complete the movie. The Hollywood Reporter provided an update to this particular article where they wrote, quote, after the story's publication, Nigam, that's one of the producers, reached out to say, my statement that I was confident the film could be completed was just my optimism and not an actual plan. Many of those who were involved hope to honor Helena by completing her last work, but at this point, it is just hope. End quote. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.